Afternoon, members of Synod. We now come to item 20 on our agenda, the annual report of the Archbishop's Council. This is a presentation under Standing Order 107, and I'm delighted to introduce Mrs. Mary Chapman and the Reverend Dr. Ian Paul, who are going to make a presentation. The presentation will be followed by a short time for questions.
Good afternoon, Synod. And may I start by thanking you for confirming my appointment yesterday, because it allows me to share with you in a further 2 years of our work together in service of the Lord. I am very grateful. In last year's presentation, I spoke about the purpose and structure, the funding and the responsibilities of the Council as an introduction for new members of Synod. We're not doing that today, but the same information is available in the annual report. Last year too, I remember, I offered an aperitif to the budget that follows. But today, Ian and I are going to offer you a sandwich between us as we highlight aspects of the Council's work and reaffirm our plans for this year. Now, I am neither a mathematician nor an accountant. This may not reassure you greatly, as I'm also the chair of the Audit Committee, but I promise you I focus on those things. But I do believe that numbers can paint such a vivid picture. So I start with the summary income and expenditure charts, because these two slides portray clearly the interconnectedness of the Church of England and its commitment to the redistribution of our resources in support of our aims. The two principal sources of income last year, and I have to say, as always, are the church commissioners and the dioceses through the apportionment. What we receive in grants from the historic endowment managed by the commissioners is largely redistributed in grants to dioceses. What we receive from the apportionment is used to resource the work of the Council, which is also in support of parishes, dioceses, bishops, and the wider Church. So that interconnectedness comes through strongly. We also receive grants from other sources, most noticeably in 2016, the second tranche of the First World War Centenary Cathedrals Repair Fund. The Council is acutely conscious of our responsibility to use these resources wisely. And we are deeply grateful too for the generosity and sacrificial giving of church members, and for the partnership of the church commissioners, and for their wonderful management and stewardship of our historic resources. If we examine expenditure, you will see, and I hope you will be pleased, that the lion's share is devoted to selecting and resourcing for public ministry. And that includes ministry support for low-income dioceses, ministry training, and clergy retirement housing. Renewal and reform has been the central emphasis for the Council's work, with a particular focus on ministry, on discipleship, on making better use of the Church's money, on new channels for evangelism, and on seeking to involve the whole Church together we pray and work to bring closer the coming of the kingdom. And Ian is going to highlight some of the key aspects of the year.
I'll just be working through different pages of the report. If you have it, you just might want to have those pages open in front of you. Of course, one of the key priorities is encouraging spiritual and numerical growth. And as Mary has already mentioned, one of the things that we're conscious of and on the council we keep returning to is the fact that we're not doing things in isolation. We're working very much in partnership with the House of Bishops, but particularly in partnership with dioceses and with the local church in parishes up and down the country. And one of the key focuses here has been research to provide information and insight to enable the resources to be deployed most effectively. So we've been developing materials and training to support dioceses and parishes, particularly related to mission opportunities at significant life events, which we see expressed in the marriage project, funerals, and baptism. And of course, one of our emphases, as always, has been on prayer and worship, and it's been fascinating, I think, in the last 12, 18 months to see the way that different campaigns, particularly relating to some key moments in the life of the Church's year, have really caught the imagination, not just in parishes in the Church of England, but internationally and interdenominationally as well. So particularly the Just Pray campaign around Easter, Thy Kingdom Come, the Archbishop's encouragement for a global wave of prayer from Pentecost to Ascension, and the Christmas campaign, Joy to the World. One of the other key focuses has been on developing resources for lay and ordained ministry. The report, Setting God's People Free, with a team led by Matthew Frost, has been particularly exciting, and we've discussed that previously in Synod, developing discipleship and lay leadership, the contribution and leadership that lay people exercise in their lives Monday to Saturday. And that seems really, again, to have captured imagination widely in the Church. We've been finalising in 2016 and piloting new arrangements for the funding of ministerial education. And although there have been some serious questions and reflection on that, it feels very much as though we've been making progress. Obviously, we're reporting on what's happened in 2016, but the momentum for that has continued into the current year. We've been working to support dioceses to strengthen vocations across the Church, including expanding the opportunities for the Ministry Experience Scheme for young people, and many of you would have been involved in that and seen the fruit of it. One of the things that we can't escape is the question of safeguarding and promoting a safer church. And work has continued to build a stronger national approach to safeguarding, renewing both a culture and processes that protect the vulnerable, whilst also, as we're keenly aware of, continuing to respond to some grievous failures from the past. I think an important part of this, an important part of our visible accountability, has been the fact that the Archbishop's Council has commissioned in 2016 20 independent diocesan safeguarding audits. And this has got to be a key part of ensuring that we can be unconditionally welcoming to all people, regardless of their circumstances. Another key area, a vast area really of the Church's work, has been contributing to the common good. And again, this is one where the Archbishop's Council has been working very much in partnership, particularly working in partnership with the House of Bishops and those bishops who serve in the House of Lords, and enabling them to speak into the public square and in Parliament on a whole range of issues as diverse as child poverty, Sunday trading, gambling regulation, projects on refugee settlement, modern slavery and human trafficking, and the whole question of social cohesion. We've supported the launch of the Just Finance Foundation, taking forward the Archbishop of Canterbury's initiative on responsible credit and lending. And staff from the Archbishop's Council have supported the continued work under the banner of presence and engagement, which we debated earlier in this synod. Of course, another enormous area of work is that of education, and the Church continues to be a leading agent in the provision of primary and secondary education. We've seen the launch by the National Society of the Church of England Foundation for Educational Leadership, and the commitment to achieving a proportionate share of new free schools and academies under the government's initiative within the church school portfolio. One of the major assets of the church is, of course, our church buildings. And in addition to the First World War Centenary Fund, which Mary referred to earlier, from which 39 cathedrals have benefited, That's a fund of £20 million disbursed in 2016, adding to the £20 million previously disbursed. The Council's own fundraising efforts have also helped to award nearly £600,000 in grants to churches to ensure that buildings become less of a burden and more of an asset in facilitating mission and ministry. And if you look in the report, there are some really interesting case studies of how that money has made a difference on the ground. Another fascinating area of work has been engaging in the range of environmentally focused projects, including participating in the ecumenical Big Church Switch, encouraging churches and cathedrals to switch their energy supplies to renewable sources. And there's a lovely photo of Gloucester Cathedral, which has become the first ancient cathedral to have its roof fully covered with solar panels. Of course, a key part of our partnership is providing practical and financial support for the diocese, and I hope you enjoy. I think there was very positive feedback for all the activity that we discussed on Saturday afternoon, again illustrating the vital partnership between the centre and dioceses and parishes. Parish resources, the information hub, helping to centralise buying have all been important contributions to this, and the Pathways project, which is a new service enabling ministry transition, are all part of that. During 2016, we began to really invest in and plan for development of digital communications. I know those of you who are in the session on that on Saturday afternoon were very excited by the possibilities. And in 2016, we started to do the work on revising the central website, and that's continued to have momentum this year, and I think is going to have some very exciting results. We've offered advice and training in a variety of areas, and the coordination of diocesan peer review. Many of you here will have been involved in applications towards the Strategic Development Fund. This was just really taking off in 2016, so the total amount awarded was around 7.8 million. And again, there are some interesting examples in the report of specific projects there. We've just listed a few of those here. Certainly in Southern Nottingham, where I am, we've immediately benefited from that. And again, that's generated a lot of momentum, and this year there'll be about 3 times the amount of money dispersed in that. Now, 2016 marked the last year of the long-established funding scheme and the transition to this new way of doing it, where 50% of the funds from the church commissioners continue to go to the lowest income communities, and the other 50% to support these strategic development initiatives underpinning diocesan strategies for growth. And that's a fascinating example of a 3- or 4-way collaboration between the council, the church commissioners, House of Bishops, and the diocese. All of this, you'll be well aware, is supported by a vibrant programme of communications. And again, the report details give a flavour of this with some fascinating statistics. The Daily Prayer app now has over 12,000 monthly users, enough to fill St Paul's Cathedral 5 times over. Just a useful statistic to help us envision the power and the effect of these electronic communications.
I hope you've been able to get a little sense from this and a better sense from the report and from Council's contributions to this synod, that the elements of renewal and reform that this synod agreed over the last 2 years are being implemented with commitment and vigour. We are conscious of the challenge and indeed the risks for the Council in terms of focus, prioritisation and resources. And to address that, the Council has agreed a new set of objectives for the period 2017 to 2020. An indication of this is included in last year's annual report, but the full current version is in GS MISC 1169 from the Secretary-General, which I hope you have to hand, because I'm not going to go through it in detail. It would take much too long. For each of the objectives, we have developed an aim for 2020 and more specific aims for the current year in 2017. We are also deeply conscious of our limitations and have tried to concentrate on what the Council can deliver in terms of its support to and partnership with the wider church. The Archbishop's Council staff team, led by William Nye, will do everything they can to fulfil the commitments the Council is making. They are a largely silent presence at Synod, but this is an opportunity to recognise and express gratitude for their contribution throughout the year. But let us not kid ourselves, Synod. The Archbishop's Council will not achieve the headline objectives on its own, because it does not lie within the Council's gift to bring about the scale of transformation that these objectives describe. But I believe that if every person and organisation within the Church of England plays their part, through the infinite grace of God, we will see the renewal that we need so that more people will come to know the love of God. Thank you.
Members of Synod, on your behalf, I'd like to thank Mrs. Mary Chapman and Dr. Ian Paul for the presentation, helping us to understand a little more about the totality of the work of the Archbishop's Council. We now have a relatively short time, but some time for questions, and I hope, members of Synod, that if you are going to ask a question, you'll be as succinct as possible so we can hear as many questions from as many people as possible. I'll take the questions in groups of 3. I call for questions James Carey, Patrick Richmond, Gavin Oldham.
James Carey, Bath and Wells, 246. Thank you, Chair, for calling me for my maiden question. This is not a speech, I cannot emphasise that enough. I'm from the Diocese of Bath and Wells, and it was in Wells Cathedral in November last year that I was thrilled to hear Archbishop Justin speak powerfully about his desire to make known the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and to speak of him specifically by name as often as possible. Especially in media interviews, we really should do it more often. Our friends in the media hate it when we do that.
Can we move to your question?
Yes, my question is therefore, my reservation about the report is that the name of Jesus occurs twice. And although the activities of the report are excellent, we need to remember that we do these specifically for the name of the Lord Jesus. And therefore
I'm still waiting for your question.
Yes. My question is, could future reports please give the name of the Lord Jesus slightly greater prominence to remind us of why we do these activities? That's all. Thank you.
Patrick Richmond, Norwich 180. Thank you for the report and the update. My question is also about strategic focus, perhaps not so high, but still very important. The challenge of passing on our faith to younger generations has been shown to be highly significant by all the research we've been doing. We've got older congregations, we need to replace retiring clergy. Our research in anecdote and evidence shows that it's churches with work with young people that are growing, and, well, I'm coming to it, Chair. The research we most helpfully heard about on Sunday afternoon, or was it Saturday, also confirms that it's young people where evangelism is most effective. And looking at the objectives and the aims...
I really do need to cut you to come to your question now.
Looking at the objectives and the aims, it seems that we've lost strategic focus on youth. There just isn't a mention of it as in places where there even was before. Why?
Gavin Oldham, Oxford 378. I'm increasingly concerned about the way sorry, what's the problem? No? I understand that. Increasingly concerned about the way we arrange mutual support within the church, which is often seen as a top-down process. There's a strong understanding of the biblical foundation for mutual support, but too often it feels imposed on the next layer down, rather than joyful giving and receiving.
Mr. Oldham, can I have your question, please?
Would the Archbishop's Council consider how to encourage more engagement in mutual support, particularly by twinning donors and recipients, whether at diocesan level, deanery or parishes, and in due course, I hope, in cathedrals?
I'm very happy to answer the first two questions. James Carey, thank you very much for yours, and we had a discussion about that over lunch. I think my first reflection is that Jesus' name is mentioned as something to do with the genre of these kinds of reports. I mean, we talk about discipleship. Do we need to say they're disciples of Jesus? I don't know. We talk about the prominence of evangelism. Do we need to articulate this is evangelism so that people might come to faith in Jesus? I'm not sure that's necessary. And in a local church APCM report, I don't know how much Jesus is mentioned explicitly, but certainly I'm very excited by the fact that evangelism is the number one objective for the Council. But I think it's an interesting question. I think we'll bear it in mind for next year's report. The second question about evangelism amongst young people, I think, yes, that's certainly, we're very aware of that. One of the discussions we did have, which perhaps isn't reflected prominently in here, and we actually had a very animated and excited discussion about it in the Council, was the issue of evangelism, particularly amongst university students. And that's an ongoing piece of work where we really feel as though there's a role that we can play as the Church of England in facilitating the working together of different agencies. There are some very diverse agencies doing evangelism amongst university students. Some of them are Anglican, others are not. And there's a facilitation and a coordination role there so that we can work together more effectively. I'd also draw attention to, on page 18, the launch of the RE resource, Understanding Christianity. And again, through the educational process, I think we're really keen to see people engage, young people engage in what it means actually to come to faith, particularly in the context of church schools. So that is certainly there, even if it's not prominent as a heading. I'm not sure I understood the third question, so I'll leave that to Mary.
Don't you just love it? Gavin, thank you very much for your question. And I think I have grasped that you are asking about the potential for mutual support between dioceses without any intervention, help, support from the national church. I think I've got that right. I would say that in terms of practical examples, there are already a number. The planned giving scheme, for example, which was initiated by a diocese and has now been taken up by many. But so too the learning networks that have emerged out of the leadership training, where people are coming together to grow together. And a third example would be some of the work that's coming from peer review, where dioceses following peer review are getting ideas about who they might turn to across the country to draw on good examples of what is going on. So that's from the practical perspective. If you are, and I'm not sure that you are, asking about whether one diocese could give something in terms of support to another financially in resourcing terms, I think that it's a more complicated issue, and I think it would need exploring. And we have taken a view within the church as a whole over time, and when we agreed to the new arrangements for resourcing the future, that it would work through the giving of grants to the lowest income communities, rather than necessarily the lowest income dioceses, and then looking at funding growth and development, also with the focus on the poor. So we've adopted that as a strategy for financial redistribution. We've only just started it this year. I think we do need to give it a little bit of time to see the impact of it.
Mr. Philip French and the lady next to him, please. And these will be the last two questions.
Thank you, Chair. Philip French, Rochester 388. My question relates to information on pages 36 and 37 of the report on risks around information security and IT infrastructure, and the existence, which I welcome, of a programme to investigate how the NCIs steward data systems and processes. Clearly important given the work we're doing with digital. So are you satisfied that you have the resources and advice that you need to avoid the operational and reputational risks involved in information protection gone wrong, particularly given the advent of the European level General Data Protection Regulation in May next year, replacing the 20-year-old Data Protection Act?
Penny Allen, Lichfield 335. About strategic development funding. In applications for strategic development funding, are you satisfied with the level of advice that is given to dioceses, given that some bids fail? Thank you.
Thank you for your question about IT and data security. We have a single IT team in the National Church institutions which supports both the Archbishop's Council, the Church Commissioners and the Church of England Pensions Board, and they have been developing their expertise in these areas. There was a question earlier in this synod on the General Data Protection Regulations, and as NCIs we're working on those. We're also developing guidance which we can share with dioceses and parishes. Data security is a sort of area where I don't think we could ever say we're absolutely sure that we've got everything right. That's why it's on the risk register, and that's why we're doing work on it. And we are actually building up our team to deal with those things. But I can imagine why, sorry, I've lost sight of you now, Philip, thank you, why you've noted that that is an area of risk. At the risk of tempting fate, I would say that in the recent various ransomware attacks, I'm pleased to say that the IT team had been able to protect Church House and the NCI's IT. I'm just hoping that won't mean that we fall foul of the next one. On strategic development funding, the Strategic Investment Board is very conscious of the need to experiment and allow experiments and take account of things that might fail and use that as a learning opportunity.
Thanks to the succinct questions and answers in that last section, I can take one more question, and it needs to be really succinct, please. Sally Gaze.
Sally Gaze, Norwich 179. Question relates to the outcome indicators identified for the measuring of the progress of some of the strategic development funding projects. Do these outcome indicators, which have already been identified, I realise that we haven't got the returns because we haven't had time to get the returns back, but you identify the outcome indicators in advance. Do they contain robust ways of measuring things like conversion and numbers of unchurched people participating? Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may, I'll pick up first on the previous question related to strategic development funding, simply to say, I think I would be worried if every proposal got through, particularly on the first application. My point about the being very conscious about, I can't see the question now, I'm sorry, about how we use the resources that are entrusted to us means that we want to be sure that we are applying the criteria rigorously. But I would say we want every diocese and eventually every application to succeed. And that's why there is quite a bit of investment in development of capacity, in giving advice and guidance to dioceses about how to structure their applications, how to think about their outcome indicators, which takes me on to the second point. And the answer to your question is, in short, yes. The Council, together with the Church Commissioners, has spent a lot of time, supported by staff and supported by external advisors as well, coming to a conclusion about a sensible range of indicators that are measurable. It's the first time we've done it. It will be work in progress. It will be reviewed. We are setting up a joint funding monitoring group between the Commissioners and the Council to take a broader overview of how all this is working.
Yes, a very brief comment as well. We also had very specific analysis done by Philip James on the staff for one example of the Strategic Development Fund work, which was on church planting, resource church planting, and the analysis actually looked at the makeup of congregations, how many of those came from transfer growth, how many came from de-churched, how many came from unchurched, and that information is being made available more widely. You can also find an analysis of that on a widely read blog, and I can direct that to you if you're interested afterwards.
Thank you, members of Synod, for the questions, and thank you, William, Mary and Ian, for the answers. That now concludes item 20, and we move to item 21 on the agenda.
Synod, welcome to our next series of items. We've actually got 8 things to deal with, items 21 through to 28, that all relate to the Archbishop's Council budget and proposals for apportionment for 2018. It'll be helpful if you can keep order paper number 5 to hand, the yellow paper with all of that on. GS 2076 is the document that you'll find it helpful to be able to refer to. The way we're going to structure this, in theory, Canon Spence could speak for 10 minutes on each of these items. What we thought was, rather than that, with your general permission, we'd like for him to talk for up to 15 minutes in a general introduction, and then when we get to items sort of 22, etc., then he will move them pretty succinctly. Also, although this is a take note debate, item 21, I think it would be helpful for Canon Spence, so we're not having to worry about the taking of notes, if perhaps we could have 3 speeches at a time from the floor, and then, with your general permission, for Canon Spence to reply to those. I think that might structure the debate a little more easy. I may even ask for people who put down to speak on particular themes within the budget to come together. So again, it may be that a joint response to several questions will be possible. Is that okay, colleagues, in terms of how we're going to play this afternoon? Thank you. I've done this with Canon Spence before. Some think it's our annual Morecambe and Wise outing, or Little and Large. He may be Canon, I'm definitely not Ball. Canon Spence, would you like to introduce the afternoon?
Well, Bishop David, I might be Canon, I'm also bald, sadly, but there we go. It's a great pleasure to be here, I must say, and you'll notice I've even dressed for the occasion. My dear wife Yvonne, who's up there in the gallery, has likened me to a potato, on the grounds that I'm tastier with my jacket on. You may have heard about the duck who walked across the pavement to the curb and looked as if it was about to try to cross the road. A chicken rushed up and said, "Don't do that. If you try and cross the road, you'll never hear the end of it." which has absolutely nothing to do with the budget, but does serve the needs of the security guards, who have apparently been quoted as saying they like it when I stand up because they have a laugh. They get no insight, but they have a laugh. So let's get on to the budget, and it is clearly no laughing matter. Now, I'd like to start by showing you the budget in a slightly different way. In 2018, the Archbishop's Council will have responsibility for spending £104.7 million. 24.8 of that coming in the funds going through to lower income communities through dioceses, subject to peer reviews and annual reports. 15.2 million of the transitional funding agreed by the Church Commissioners has weaned dioceses off those most heavily dependent on Darlow. And the 24.8 million of strategy development funding, which has already been talked about, and I'm sure there'll be more questions. That adds up to 64.8 million, in addition to which we have the 39.9 million of expenditure across votes 1 to 5. On the strategic funding piece, we started as an experiment in 2014 to 16, being very clear that it has to be aligned to strategies developed by the diocese, and we have indeed in the £74 million for spending over the next 3 years, got £6 million that is specifically earmarked for helping dioceses develop that strategic capacity, so that penny, for instance, we can help Lichfield and other places get through their bids after the appropriate amount of enablement and facilitation. We granted 15 million of applications in 14 to 16. We've done 20 million so far, but please don't confuse that with spending, because one of the things we are learning is just how long it takes in the gap between when the funds are agreed and when they come to be spent because of planning issues or recruitment or just the sheer work of project management. The SDF funding assessment is carried out by the Strategy Investment Board, which I chair on your behalf, and which is very clear that we have a real challenges, that we have to make sure that we work based on evidence, that we do have that strategic alignment at all times, and that we must carry on monitoring and reviewing the impacts to ensure that they are in line with the business case. It is a radically different departure for the Church of England and is being approached with the amount of care that should be devoted to it. I always hope that we will enable and facilitate dioceses to have the success that they want, and success for me will come when all dioceses and all parts of the Church have, in the name of Jesus Christ, received funding because they've had successful applications. But let's get back to that part of the budget that you know best in these debates, which is votes 1 to 5, totalling this year £39.9 million of expenditure, with £31.9 million being funded through apportionment, our calls on the diocese. So now £8 million coming from other sources, and this driven, of course, by items such that you've heard about a lot to do with evangelism, reform and renewal, offset by the operating efficiencies we continue to demand of the executive team. If we look over the trend over the years from 2005 and 10 up to the current year, it's an interesting pattern that emerges. Vote 1, you'll see, going up by small amounts every year. That will change, and we'll come on to that. The operating budget going up since 2010 by only 0.1% per annum. As the government is learning to its cost, austerity can only continue for so long. And this year we've had to accept a bigger increase. We will continue to push down heavily on every piece of excess we can find, but we equally need to realise it can't go on forever and that we do need to invest. And in vote 5 there you see the continuing piece since 2010 of the synodical commitment to increase the funding for retired clergy housing by 5% per annum to 2020. Hopefully thereafter it will only go up in line with inflation. And you will see, of course, that overall the growth in the apportionment has been less than the various measures of the cost of living. Let's look at vote 1 and this great success that is coming through in 2017. In 2016, we failed to achieve the desired 10% growth in the number of new ordinands, but we are on track for 14.5% growth in September, with 543 new ordinands starting, which is great, but it's only the start of the story, because we aspire next year to 597, a further 10% growth. But just look at the numbers below that for the total numbers in ordinand training. Going up from last year 1,174 to this year 1,234 to next year 1,383. And if we can pull that off, ladies and gentlemen, it tells you something of the great work being done in every diocese as they call out to vocations by the Ministry Council team in creating the capacity to support them. But above all, in the future of the Church of England, and I will keep saying serving Jesus, in making sure that we have that ordained leadership, young, energetic, to supplement and complement and eventually take over from those clergy who are retiring. One of the great things about this year's numbers is a significant shift in the age profile, and with significantly larger numbers of young women coming through, which had been a source of particular concern. And on the next slide then you will see the financial element of this. Next year alone, the cost of this vote one goes up from 14.1 to 15.2 million. It goes up £1 million in a year, which is actually more than the total increase in the apportionment which is requested in your budget. If you were to look at the order papers for this debate, you would see that if the growth was to continue at this rate over the next few years, those annual increases would go 2 and 3 million in 2019 and 2020. So these are big numbers. Moving on to votes 2 to 4, primarily driven here by increases in evangelism, where we're reorganising and having a director for evangelism. Renewal and reform, where we are going to have a director of renewal and reform because William simply can't do everything. Safeguarding, where we must carry on spending the money that we have to spend. We know we have to do it, and we must make sure it is spent to best effect and in liaison very closely with the diocese, on whom the ultimate responsibility must lie. And then, as you've heard already, our desire to continuing investing in the digital piece, all of these leading to increases overall in votes 2 to 4. The assumptions that underpin this is that there will be a very steady state in other areas of investment. We will keep it pinned down. We've worked on the assumption of inflation running at 2.5. Who can tell where it will end up the way it's going at the moment? But we have assumed that grants and missionary numbers will both stay flat. So that's vote 3 and 4. So the growth in this particular element of the budget is coming in vote 2. And then vote 5, as we've already said, we're nearing the end of our 10-year commitment to increase by 5% per annum the support for the CHARM scheme. We know the huge amount that the pension boards have done in making the scheme much more effective, but also cost-effective as well in supporting clergy. And we will come in due course to consider what that means for beyond 2020, what further support they will need. And we end up with a budget where we see total expenditure grow by 2.2 million, or 6%. And that is funded to a degree by the amount we earn in operating income from different sources, by an element of capital drawdown, and we know we can't keep doing that, but we've been able to do it this year, indeed had to do it this year, because we could not yet open up other sources of funding. We will continue to benefit from rent relief under agreements we have in place with the Corporation of Church House and our fellows, the Church Commissioners, who have been very generous in this area as well as in others. And so that 0.9 million of the 2.2 million growth in expenditure coming from the apportionment increase. Now, I'm going to go and look beyond 2018, and I don't want to scare you because I'll come back to it after. But we can all see the issues that are coming down the line. We have the fact that we need to continue investing. We have that growth that we want to achieve in the things that we do. We have talked already about the fact that we cannot carry on drawing down on capital, so we need to develop funding streams that overcome that. We have talked about the challenge that we will face in going with digital. And the big elephant in the room is, of course, this growth in ordinary numbers, which we desperately want. And which I said earlier, and I probably skimmed over in the slide, it isn't just now about the growth in the bill for the training for the ordinands. The dioceses are already coping with the maintenance bills of over £5 million. But as more and more come out through ordination into curacy, there will be the cost of that curacy piece, and several bishops are already talking to us about that. So when I look at the challenges of funding beyond 2018, I see this piece of not drawing down in capital, to which I've alluded. If we stop doing that, it's the equivalent of a 2.7% increase in apportionment. If we were to lose all our rent relief, that would be 3.5%, quite before you come to any of the impacts of the increased ordination numbers and curacy. But that is not what you're talking about today. And I don't want anyone to worry, because we've shown this just to be transparent with you about this is the scale of the financial challenge. The role of the Archbishop's Council, the Finance Committee, and ultimately me, is to ensure that finance does not become the barrier to the ambition, or more particularly, it is our job to have really good dialogue with all our partners, inside and slightly beyond the church, such as the All Churches Trust, the Corporation of Church House and Church Commissioners, who can work with us on funding solutions. But ultimately, to enable and facilitate the finance to enable the achievement of the ambitions which underpin all of this. Bishop David, I'm very happy to invite Synod to take notes in 21 and to move recommendations 22 to 28.
Item 21 is now open for debate. I noticed several people have indicated they would want to intervene and talk a little bit about particularly the ordination numbers and costs, TEIs, those sort of things. If I could just encourage those who want to talk about that to be standing in the first instance, and we'll take perhaps 3 interventions on that subject. Bishop Guildford, Sir Charles. And after these 3, then I'll invite Canon Spence to respond. Speech limit 5 minutes.
Andrew Watson, Guildford 20. And so it's official, well, almost. 543 gifted, passionate people have been accepted for ordained ministry in the Church of England over the past year, a 14% or so increase on the year before. 25% of them, that's 136 people, are young. 5% of them, that's 27 people, are BAME. And for the first time in the Church's history, the number of women being accepted for stipendiary ministry almost matches the number of men. And it's not that the Church of England is dumbing down its selection processes or succumbing to some kind of vocational grade inflation. It's rather that a little more prayer is being offered to the Lord of the harvest, and a little more training to the harvesters, and there's been a little sharpening of the scythes, and developing a culture of vocation is at last being recognised as one of the key tasks of every parish and chaplaincy, rather than simply landing on the desks of hard-pressed vocations teams. One swallow does not make a summer, of course, and the only true answer to the question that I've often been asked, is this a blip or a trend, is I really don't know, but I'm extremely hopeful. In particular, were all the dioceses to get on board in the way that some of the dioceses have got on board, I can see absolutely no reason why we shouldn't increase ordinary numbers by a further 10% next year on the way towards our 50% increase by 2020 and beyond. But here there is already a problem. Many dioceses are wrestling imaginatively with the question of how they are going to fund the extra curacies we already know about, let alone those that are currently known to God alone. The finance is more complicated, as we know, than simply replacing retiring clergy with new ones, dyed-in-the-wool clergy with wet-behind-the-ears clergy. While a single whammy might be just about manageable, as John himself has recognised, a double whammy isn't. So the talk of an 11% apportionment rise in section 20 of this afternoon's report would be catastrophic, as has already been recognised, to the whole enterprise. Already, we do know of dioceses that are effectively planning a cap on ordinand numbers, either through a poorly resourced vocations team or through a noble but mistaken commitment to guarantee curacies for all their local candidates. Already, some DBFs outstretched a breaking point. Even in a diocese like mine, which rightly contributes a seven-figure sum through apportionment, the fact that Guildford is the diocese most dependent on parish share receipts, 95% dependent in fact, means that such rises in apportionment would really hold us back. And this in a diocese which, praise the Lord, has encouragingly raised its ordinand numbers by 13 or 14 in the average year to 21 in the past year. And so I fully welcome the suggestion of a dialogue with the Church Commissioners as outlined in section 21, but I would urge that the dialogue begins today and not, quote, when further evidence of growth is established. My fear is that artificially delaying the start of that conversation might well in itself stifle further growth rather than releasing it. And while I recognise that the Church Commissioners are reluctant to fund more of what they see as the core business of the Church, the truth is this, that a potential rise in 50% in ordinand numbers could never be described as business as usual. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Keith Cordran, then Charles Reid.
Keith Cordran, Liverpool 345. And I too want to refer to paragraphs 20 and 21 in particular in this report. And if you look at paragraph 20, you will see, as the Bishop has just mentioned, that there's a forward look, which I welcome, but it's suggesting that we may be looking at apportionment increases of 9.4% in 1919 and 11.1%. 2019 in 2020, and this is, as we know, because we believe that our prayers are going to be answered, and we will have the extra ordinands whom we will need to train and support. But this is obviously a serious potential issue because the report itself says that such levels of apportionment are, quote, unsustainable. But it's all right because we have a cunning plan. And the plan is that the council will approach the Church Commissioners, and I picked up exactly the same phrase as the Bishop, where it says firmer evidence of growth is required before this conversation can commence. Why? If we may realistically have to face this issue, let's start the discussions now. I have to say, I don't think it will come as a complete surprise to the Church Commissioners to be asked to address this. So, yes, as the Bishop said, let it begin today. But I have another and possibly slightly bigger concern. When I first became involved in the national finances of the Church, 20 years ago or more, I was struck by a strange bipolarity. If you had an item of expenditure for what we now call the Archbishop's Council budget, it was crawled over in detail. There was anxiety over what it was going to do to the apportionment, which shouldn't increase, all the things that are said in the paper about it. But if you could get it funded by the Church Commissioners, well, nobody paid. The money was just there. The Commissioners were producing lots of money, and I mean, it wasn't as if markets ever went down. And the Church Commissioners wanted to help. So they took on commitments, and those commitments were to good things. And we then eventually found they were overextended, and we have had to restructure the Church's finances very painfully, as we all know. And I am anxious that we do not replay in our own day this similar type of experience following the Commissioner's excellent performance recently. I am concerned that it may feel too easy. If you look at the Church Commissioner's annual report and their analysis of risks, the second risk they list is that, quote, responses to significant increases in support costs and other financial demands may impact on the level of distribution. And one of their responses to this and ways of handling it is the early identification of emerging costs. Well, here is one. So they need to be looking at this. in the context of the experience we've had before. So 2 points I want to put to Canon Spence. Firstly, that the discussion with the commissioners should be starting now. I see no premium in delay. And secondly, that we must not recreate the impression that we have a never-ending funding source, what in other places is being called a magic money tree, where one stroke of the pen means that the problem is solved. There will not, as far as I can see, be new money. There are hard decisions to take about priorities, whatever source the money comes from, and we should not pretend otherwise. Thank you.
Reverend Charles Reid.
Charles Reid, Norwich 181. I declare my interest in this twofold. I have two jobs. One job, I work for a regional training course, a TI. My other job, I work as a diocesan officer, so I can see issues of ordination, training and funding from both sides of the fence. And it's very good to hear all the good news about more students coming, more candidates coming in for ordination training, and we hope also for training for licensed lay ministry. And there is lots of good news there, as we've heard, but also some questions that are raised. Some time ago, some years ago, I was at a meeting of college and course staff with some folk from the ministry division, and there was rolled out to us a proposal for allowing total sort of free market approach to where students went to do their ordination training. And many of us in the room, both on the colleges and courses sectors, were nervous about this, and this is not a good idea. So being somebody who does not know the meaning of the phrase tact and sensitivity, I said to the Ministry Division official who had told us about this, can you please tell me what is the theological rationale for a free market economics approach to what you've just outlined? The Ministry Division staff members said, we don't do theology in the Ministry Division. I'm glad you laughed, because that probably is the appropriate response. That member of staff is no longer working for the NCIs, and we do now, when we have meetings with the Ministry Division, there is always theological input, for which we must thank Ava John, who pioneered the Common Awards process, but also Ian McIntosh, the head of formation currently, who provide very good theological input. But my question stands, what is the theological underpinning of the way we handle our money in the way that it is dispersed? If you talk to people who run TEIs, whether colleges or courses, they will all tell you that none of them feel financially secure and stable, and that cannot be good for the life of our church. It adds stress to all of us who work in that sector, particularly to principals and to chairs of college and course councils. I want to highlight one particular issue where this is a problem. If you are an ordination candidate going to train full-time in a residential college, you normally get a choice of where to go and train. With one or two exceptions, that's still normally true. If you are a candidate training on a regional course, and nowadays that might also be full-time, and it certainly isn't part-time, so certainly isn't non-residential, you will often not get a choice of where you go and train, but sometimes you will, and that's the problem. Because some dioceses give their candidates in that position a choice of which part residential course to train on, and some don't. And that means that some part residential courses get a bigger pool to recruit students from and therefore fee income, and some don't. The analogy I thought of a minute ago was like this. If I am running a shop that sells ice cream sundaes, that would be my dream retirement job, except I'd probably eat most of the stock. If I'm running a shop selling ice cream sundaes, and next door to me is my friend who also runs a shop selling ice cream sundaes, we both sell excellent and delicious ice cream sundaes, but I am only allowed to sell my ice cream sundaes to houses on the south side of the street, whereas my neighbour and friend, she's allowed to sell her ice cream sundaes on both sides of the street. And that's how it is with some of our regional courses. Now, if I can do John Spence's work for him, if I were John Spence, I'd be replying to myself and saying, that's an interesting question, Mr. Reid, but it's not really within the remit of the Archbishop's Council budget. And that would be a fair comment. But I do think somebody somewhere needs to be looking at
how we stabilise our TEIs financially in a way that is responsible and robust. I'm not saying that we should not ask hard questions of institutions that are not doing their job, but there is a real issue of financial instability amongst our TEIs, and even with growing numbers of students, I think that will continue. And somebody somewhere needs to look at this to see whether anything can be done and whether it can be done in a prompt manner. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to invite Canon Spence to respond to those items. He has up to 3 minutes and no mentions of ice cream. Oh, go on then.
What's the point of being here? Charles, can I entirely agree with you? I'm not going to answer. And I fully understand. I have had meetings with the TEI principals. I've tried to help them be reassured, but it really is not an issue for the Archbishop's Council budget in terms of what are individual diocesan policies for choice or allocation of places at colleges, that is, for the dioceses. And I continue to hope that the TEIs will think how they can help each other, actually, in the arms of financial stability. So I then come back to Bishop Andrew and to Keith and their very legitimate concerns. So let me say again, we showed this forward look to show what it would be like if we were successful with the ongoing trend on ordinance without solving the budgetary piece. And the last thing I would ever want to do is to hear about caps and ordinance. The debate has indeed started, the dialogue. There's always a time lag between when these papers have to be printed and where we are today. If you'd looked at the last slide when I was giving my address, I said formal application will be made. So we have moved beyond the question of do we need further evidence? No, we have to assume the trend continues, and we will be making formal application into the Church Commissioners later in this calendar year. That requires an immense amount of work. After you agree this budget today, I start work on the budget for 2019. And we will want to understand from dioceses exactly what their financial challenges are. We know some are facing real challenges following the withdrawal of Darlow, even though they've had transitional funding. We need to understand where those issues are greatest, which ones we can address ourselves, and what we can legitimately talk to the Church Commissioners about. And if I take Keith's point about the Church Commissioners' funds, absolutely there is no magic money tree. I did the conversations with them before the previous money was found to enable the transitional funding post-Darlow. And I can say I had 5 hours of legitimate interrogation by the Church Commissioners. I don't think that's too strong a word. And I know that they will only accept a further application from the Archbishop's Council if they are convinced, firstly, that it is a test that will stand the test of time, that it is now covering all the pieces. Secondly, that it has a logic and basis that says that we have the strategic growth now firmly in plan and that we will not fail in what we're doing. And thirdly, that we recognise that they are not going to go back into an era of uncontrolled over-distribution. They take their responsibilities very seriously. I respect that. The dialogue is well underway. We are commissioning the work. I met with the chair of the Ministry Council at lunchtime around the investigations that we need to do, and I look forward to having a full discussion at Archbishop's Council in September and Church Commissions in November.
Thank you. Now for more general debate, but I'm a 3-minute speech limit from here. I can see Giles there and Philip behind him. We'll take those two next.
Thank you for calling me Chair. Giles Goddard, Southwark 220. 3 years ago, the Synod voted overwhelmingly for an environment motion which, among other things, set up something called the Environment Working Group, reporting to the Archbishop's Council as part of our 5th mark of mission. That group has now been set up. It's chaired by the Bishop of Salisbury. It's done some excellent work, and I think a report is on its way to Archbishop's Council about the work that we've been doing. As members will know, the environment is becoming more and more important in our priorities, which is why it is one of the part of the 5th mark of mission. and the Archbishop of Canterbury recently became the president of the Anglican Communion Environmental Network in recognition of that. So I'm really concerned about two things, really. One is that in GS 2076, paragraph 53, which is the paragraph talking about the priorities of mission and public affairs, doesn't mention the environment. And secondly, paragraph 55, which is the paragraph talking about the priorities of the Church Buildings Council, also only mentions the environment tangentially. But those are the two departments in which our environmental staff sit. So it feels as though we're not being very joined up as a church. The Synod has voted for this to be a priority, but it doesn't seem to be a priority in Church House. And in that context, we have real concern about the Archbishop's environmental advisor, who's currently a part-time post on 3 days a week, and we've been advised that there's a likelihood that his post will be cut to 2 days a week from 2018 in order to meet the extra costs. We think this would be detrimental, and we're also not sure about the Cathedrals and Church Buildings post, that will continue at the same level. We really need to prioritise this work. We're hoping to have a whole day on Synod, a day at Synod next year, next July, talking about this. And we really do need, as a church, to ensure that the environment is sufficiently significant and is properly funded. So can I have your assurance that those posts will not be cut, and also that the priorities will be reinvigorated? Thank you.
Thank you, Giles. Philip Blinkhorn, followed by, yes, you, sir.
Philip Blinkhorn, 361 Manchester. I want to ask a question about safeguarding. The expenditure is increasing. The budget for 2017 was 1.38 million. The forecast is 1.5 spend. It's up to 1.6 for next year, and I'm sure that as we get to 19 and 20, we will see, if not similar increases, certainly increases. And I'm pretty sure that this is mirrored by most dioceses. I'm the chair of the Board of Finance in Manchester, and the amount of time and effort and money that's being spent on safeguarding rises every year. It does concern me, and I think it's an area where the church would benefit from not allowing quite as much discretion to dioceses as there is at the moment in terms of staffing and expenditure. And I think it's an area that the NCIs could usefully look at a national service which would give us the ability to staff correctly, and also to make sure that we have some uniformity of practice. I do trust that this is something that could be looked at for perhaps 2019 and 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Richmond. Then I'll invite Canon Spence to respond again.
Patrick Richmond, Norwich 180. Thank you for calling me Chair. I'm so grateful for all that Canon Spence and the team are doing, and for his robust and forward-looking approach. Some will probably not be surprised to hear that the prophet Jeremiah is dear to me, and I want to ask and sharpen the questions that have been raised already in regard to the challenges facing dioceses already, as well as coming down the pike. Last year, Canon Spence, in response to a question I asked, assured that there would be help for dioceses that were facing significant financial challenges. I understand that there were several of them during the year, and I'm glad to hear from some in those dioceses that things are looking better. But as there are already challenges, I wondered what sort of help was given, and did it have any budgetary implications? And as we look forward, I'm very conscious that in some dioceses, the budget that is set hopes to appoint a number of clergy, but that number isn't reached. And so a deficit budget can be transformed into a surplus budget in some dioceses simply because there are unplanned vacancies that are not filled. Now, even if we are successful, and I'm so pleased at the progress that is being made in recruiting ordinands at the rate which is aimed at and is our objective, even if that is successful, because of the retirements coming, the number of clergy available is going down. And anecdotally, I think dioceses are already finding that it's harder to place clergy, at least in certain parishes. And that may well be because the number of clergy willing to move is going down. So that obviously has massive implications it must have financial implications. They may not all be negative, though, and I wonder whether Canon Spence can give us some guidance on what is likely to happen. Is it the case that as the number of clergy available in total goes down, dioceses will not be having to pay so many stipends and will be able to release housing and reorganise their liquid assets in exchange for their fixed assets, in which case the financial implications in the future may be more positive? Or is it the case that there are other hidden costs? So some further guidance about the future and the present challenges to diocesan finance would be most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So Canon Spence to respond again. 3 minutes, John.
I'll do my best. You are a slave driver. Giles, your point on the environment, if you look at my question 79, which we didn't get to, my answer to question 79 on Friday night, I explained that the environmental advisor is employed on a consultancy basis. It is true that we are likely to have to reduce the hours a bit, but in so doing, we have taken into account the considerable other areas of focus on the environment that exists elsewhere. We can't list every objective on every page, but if you look at the objectives for 2020, there is a reference to the environment, so I assure you that the Archbishop's Council nor the staff of Church House have neglected that piece. On Philip's piece and safeguarding, we must never let ourselves think that more spending equals better spending. And there has been a significant growth in the amount of spending we've had to undertake. The department has seen huge spread in their responsibilities, the variety of things with which they're having to deal, the number of public inquiries and so on. And it is coming to be a logical time, I think, where it will be good for us to take stock of how the regime is working now and how it can be improved. This isn't for me, it is for the National Safeguarding panel, but I'm sure they will be thinking hard, how can we get the best balance between maintaining diocesan responsibility and accountability, giving central support and facilitation, but similarly achieving in a cost-effective way a consistent standard across the Church. Patrick, yes, we did provide the transitional funding to dioceses through Darlow, 15.2 million this year, or last year, that's 17, sorry, this year, 15 next. And then we have also given support and strategic capacity funding. We're very, very keen to work with the diocese to help them build the strategies. But in terms of a specific point, what's becoming clear is that while we are responding to the collection of dioceses saying that they wanted to restore the number of priests to the number of about 2010, while at the same time unlocking the qualities and talents of the lay people, the modelling is not so simple, and that's one of the pieces of work that's going to be happening over the next 3 months in advance of any approach to the Church Commissioners. So we will be coming into numerous dioceses to try to model exactly how that looks in order that we can understand the hump in the financial requirement.
Thank you. I'll take just a couple of speeches of 2 minutes, then I might be interested, in Mr. Spence responding, then a motion for closure. Lady over there, please, and then Mr. Hind.
Angela Scott, Rochester 390. Very simple question. Is there any money specifically set aside for the training of licensed lay ministry, or is Vote 1 entirely channelled into the training for ordained ministry?
Thank you. Mr. Hind, after which my learned friend tells me a motion for closure would be, I would need to seek that before Canon Spence responds. Mr. Hind.
Tim Hind, 247 Bath and Wells. You'll be pleased to know that I'm not going to ask for a theology of why we have votes 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, but the historicity of it is probably lost in the mists of time. And a couple of years ago, we got a hint that votes 3 and 4 were going to be merged. But now, if you look at the presentation that we have before us, it appears that votes 2, 3, 4 have all been merged together in the way in which things are being presented. I just wonder whether it's time for us to begin to present this a little bit better and to have quite clearly training, central costs and other, and the charm offensive just as 3 separate votes rather than wasting time on 5 separate votes.
Thank you. I had seen Canon Elizabeth Paver standing as a Vice Chair of the House of Ladies. If I would take her and then Mr Freeman, I'd be very grateful.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very quick. Canon Spence, as you might imagine, it's on education. As we all know, the current government has already said there's going to be a grave cut in the schools budget across the country, and that is going to affect our church schools radically. And I wondered if the Archbishop's Council could consider working with the National Society in order to do some sort of audit of what is actually happening in our church schools, because if we want to have them as the forefront of our mission and vision for the children, then they are all suffering greatly from this worry that they're not going to be able to maintain the quality of staff and therefore the quality of education. Thank you.
Point of order, Mr Freeman. That has my agreement. Does it have the agreement of Synod? Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. That is clearly carried. Canon Spence, 3 minutes to respond to those last few comments.
Right, and then to sum up. Okay, so Angela, no, there's no money specifically for lay ministry training because that at the moment is a diocesan responsibility. It remains to be seen how we take nationally forward the lay ministry work stream. Tim, thank you very much for reminding me that the staff wanted to do exactly what you said and I resisted it, so thank you very much, that was helpful. I actually take the view that if you're going to combine, you should keep 2 separate because that is the operating expenses bit, whereas 3 and 4 are about missionary and ecumenism. And for Liz, I'm sure we'd be very happy to work with the Education Council in thinking through this problem. I personally would love to see a greater visibility of education, both in the Archbishop Council discussions and in strategic development funding applications. The chair here can take a little tick because I know we're about to get one from Manchester that features education, but we have had a paucity of strategy applications linked to schools and education. And so if I could respond to the debate, Chairman, can I just thank you all very much. If we're going to be in the world of ice cream, you've given me an absolute tutti frutti with all sorts of varieties not currently thought of. I think probably the chocolate to make it the 99 was that ongoing theme of where do we go next. I have a very clear understanding of what you expect of me. And as I say, I start work on the budget. Well, I said tomorrow, it'll probably be tonight, because when Yvonne's driving me home, I'll start dictating notes to this lot, which they'll be really pleased about. It does give me the chance to say my personal thank you to William Nye, to Ian, and the wonderful David White, who are so patient with me. I'm not a demanding person, as you can imagine. And I'm absolutely super to work with, but they are hugely patient, respond to all my requests, get very tired when I'm on the phone all the time, but they work for you, for that risen Christ, every day, and I'm hugely grateful. Thank you.
I now put item 21 to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. That is very clearly carried. That now brings us to item 22. I think, John, you've already effectively moved on block, haven't you? Item 22 is open for debate. I see no one standing. I therefore put item 22 to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. That is clearly carried. We move on to item 23. This is open for debate. I see no one standing. I therefore put item 23 to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. Thank you. Item 24 is now open for debate. It's like a post office queue, isn't it? I can see I'm developing that tone of voice as I do it. I see no one standing. I therefore put item 24 to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. That too is clearly carried. Item 25 is now open for debate. I see no one standing. I therefore put item 25 to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. That is clearly carried. Item 26 is open for the vote. Open for debate. I see no one standing. I therefore put item 26 to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. That too is clearly carried. Item 27 is now open for debate. I see no one standing. I therefore put item 27 to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. That too is clearly carried. And finally, on this slew of items, item 28 is now open for debate. Once more, I see no one standing. I therefore put item 28 to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. Thank you. That too is clearly carried. Thank you, Synod, for a good-natured debate and some swift voting at the end there. Thank you to Canon Spence for his introduction and summing up of the debate. That's point of order, Archbishop.
Out of order, but I'm going to do it anyway. I actually think that we just need to give thanks to the Lord for John Spence. How he masters the detail when actually he was not having sight. How he does it can only be a work of grace. And he's an example, I think, for all of us that whatever disabilities we may have, actually the grace of God is still capable of working through us. So I just wanted us to thank the Lord for you, and the gifting is given to you, and you actually help us to understand things which would have been very, very difficult. So in the name of our Father, Son, Spirit, we bless him, we thank him, and rejoice, John, that you're such a wonderful, faithful steward. So should we please thank him formally?
Fellow members of Synod, we now come to item 29 on our agenda, farewells. Therefore, I invite the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, to present the farewells, firstly to the Bishop of Bristol, Mike Hill, and then to the Bishop at Lambeth, Nigel Stock. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Justin Welby, Canterbury 1. Start with Mike Hill. To say farewell to Mike is one of those days at Synod when we say goodbye to a bishop who's been a source of refreshing energy, not only for his diocese, but also the wider church, and also with extraordinary humility and very quietly below the radar, an immense impact in parts of the Anglican Communion, for which we are hugely, hugely grateful. Mike hails from Manchester, born, he says, this is his words, of entrepreneurial parents. This certainly rubbed off, as we will see. Over the years, we've looked to him to be at the front of those aspects of church life which reach out beyond the usual suspects. Oh, sorry, I've just remembered something. So I must take my shoes off after the comments this morning. I don't want to offend you any further. Well, they're my Friday socks, but I did genuinely put them on this morning. I mean, for the first time since they were last washed. Like, can we get back to Mike Hill? Mike comes with that sharpness and imagination that comes from someone who discovered faith in Christ as an adult. That sense of coming into something so precious that he has a particular gift in communicating his love for Jesus Christ in the church. He began work in the printing industry. After, of course, his business studies, his entrepreneurial gifts were apparent, and they remain so to this day. But he has shown far more than that. He discovered Christ at the age of 18, and he was then encouraged to try and discover more about his vocation, and went to join the Scargill community for a year to see if that might include ordained ministry. Not only did he have that calling affirmed in that year, but he also met a nurse called Anthea, who had been living in Africa. Anthea and Mike married in 1973 and have been an extraordinary blessing. One of the things fed back from people is what a gift that they have both been as a couple and with their whole family. Anthea has had a very significant career as a nurse in palliative care at the same time as a close and vital partnership with Mike. Mike's particular gift in many ways has been of an evangelist, drawing people to faith in Christ. He did his curacy in Addiscombe and then went to the Upton Lee estate in Slough, where the church grew from single figures to over 100 in 3 years. Then came the move to Chesham Boys, Amersham. During his time at St Leonard's, Mike was inspired by the Willow Creek Community Church in Chicago. St Leonard's grew significantly to several hundred strong, and Mike became the first president of the Willow Creek Association, what you might call a sort of muscular Christian approach. But he continued not to play only on one sports area, but to integrate imaginative and effective approaches to faith into the church. I hope it gets better. And at the same time, he has had that great gift which has made him such an effective bishop of building relationships with fellow clergy, shown as he became Rural Dean of Amersham in 1989, and then moved to what is often caricatured unfairly and unjustly as the most establishment of appointments an archdeacon. But in that, he demonstrated, as so many do, that the role of archdeacon is crucial in clergy welfare and in nurturing church life. He moved on to become Bishop of Buckingham, and those different posts demonstrate his standing in the Diocese of Oxford. For the past 15 years, he's been Bishop of Bristol. He has recently done a bishop's visitation of the diocese, and it's been an opportunity for people to acknowledge what he has brought to them as a bishop. So often what they emphasized was his teaching ministry. So to quote a few, and I don't have their permission, I have on so many occasions been inspired and challenged by Bishop Mike's talks, addresses, sermons, and chats. I've learnt so much from the lectures and gone home feeling twice the person I was in the morning. Many of us here will have shared your spoken word and deed, which has inspired and uplifted us, then to go on and demonstrate our faith and commitment effectively in the parishes. Another one. You have shown by example how we engage with the realities of this world while keeping our eyes firmly fixed on the Lord. Our diocesan links with Uganda are one example of this. And indeed, the wider church has reason for to give thanks for Mike's ability to win trust in many places, not least in Uganda. He has been a constant visitor, helping mutual understanding, explaining what we are doing and what they are doing. And I want to express my personal thanks for work which, without him, would have been very, very much more complicated. Mike has wide interests, which help him connect with many people, plays the guitar, appreciates music, follows all kinds of sports. He also is apparently interested in Manchester United. I'm not going to say anything more about that. The other thing about him is his resilience, and I think that is something that we all appreciate. Members of Synod will remember a very severe car accident in which both Mike and Anthea suffered injuries, Anthea more so than Mike. It says so much about both of them that they came through that grim time with both courage and faith and without complaining or stepping away from what they were called to do more than was absolutely necessary. As a respected member of the House of Lords, Mike has contributed much over the years as a church voice in that chamber, and what is not so widely known, much more as a pastoral voice to many of the other members of the House and of the House of Commons, through staff and members, through friendship and pastoral care. He's going to be hugely missed in that forum by his bishop contemporaries, in the Synod, in his international contributions, and of course in the Diocese of Bristol. And so I'm sure on behalf of all of us, Mike, we wish you and Anthea and your family every joy in your retirement. I know that one thing from which you will not retire is from inspiring people with your love of Jesus Christ and bringing hope and joy to many. Mike, thank you very, very much indeed. I now come to one of the most difficult tasks of this synod, of any synod that I've been part of, which is admittedly not many compared to many of you, and that is a farewell to Bishop Nigel Stock, formerly Bishop of St Edmundsbury and Ipswich from October 7 to October 13, and then Bishop at Lambeth from October 13 to August 17, or July the 31st, I think, to be precise. It's a difficult task because despite working with him intimately over the last 3 years, despite extensive research done by myself and the often imagined but absolutely real secret intelligence unit based at Lambeth, known as Q, we are unable to find anything scandalous or in fact anything other than admirable. What can one say? It is deeply depressing at the end of a synod where the aim of this speech was initially to produce scandal and suppress admiration. In brief, Nigel was at university in Durham and then went on for ordination training at Ripon College, Cuddesdon. He was ordained deacon in 76, priest in 77, and bishop in 2000. His curacy was served at St Peter's, Stockton, on Tees, in an area of considerable economic stress, still is, during the late 70s, at a time when pressures on the coal industry, on almost all of the local economy, were intense. From 1979 to 1984, he was priest in charge of St. Peter's in Taraka in the Diocese of Eparongo, Papua New Guinea. Did I get that more or less right? Something like that. Which included chaplaincy work at the University of Technology and also to the PNG Defence Force. The PNG Defence Force are the two... This was, of course, excellent preparation to be bishop to the forces. I have, having spent many hours travelling with Nigel, picked up a few stories from PNG. Inevitably, there was a great deal of illness. He never mentions that. But he also had, at the same time, the immense sense of humour, which has made him one of the most attractive, intelligent, and enjoyable working companions that one could imagine. I'm sorry, I'm giving a cause for admiration. I'll try and restrain myself. One particular account, which, if you can catch him before he goes, I warmly recommend, was of the occasion when the neighbour's car, a relatively new van, was stolen by an armed group. I can't tell the whole story, and certainly not in his style, although it's worth hearing, but it goes on for a while. But it consists of the van and a pursuing police car, the only police car in the area, going round and round the only tarmac road in the area where they were living, passing them occasionally with much gunfire and sirens, until it ran off the road. The thieves escaped, and the police riddled it with bullets before returning it to its hapless owner. Nigel and Caroline both found this story hysterically funny, although it would be seen as somewhat dramatic in many parts of the United Kingdom. He returned to become Vicar of St. Mark's Shamor in Newcastle Diocese in 1985, and then Team Rector of North Shields, St. Augustine and Christchurch, and Rural Dean from 1991 to 8. From 1998 to 2000, he was a residential canon at Durham Cathedral, and the Bishop of Stockport until 2007, following which he took over as Bishop of St. Edmundsbury and Ipswich. And from 2013 till now, he's been Bishop at Lambeth, as well as, for the last 3 years, Bishop to the Forces and, obviously, Bishop to the Falkland Islands. I'll return to those later. We have tried every source for his work in the northeast of England and found only disappointing accounts of upright, dedicated, hard-working and effective ministry in areas of deprivation. John Inge, who's failed us almost completely despite being a close working companion, says, "No tales of debauchery, I'm afraid. Nigel is far too upright." Well, you'd know the difference, John. The most memorable achievement, according to John Inge, was when the Stocks were able to perform the feat of getting a whole banana intact into a milk bottle. Well, milk bottles have gone out of style, but Nigel, perhaps you can perform the trick later. I have here a bottle and a banana. The affection in which he was held in St. Edmundsbury and Ipswich is measured by the amount of vituperative correspondence I received when I approached him to become Bishop at Lambeth. I remarked then that I needed someone with diocesan bishop experience of a different churchmanship to myself and able to provide a focus of stability and calm in the obviously totally calm atmosphere at Lambeth Palace. He quickly picked up that he was the main target of these observations. He tried everything to avoid the job, including going to Australia and breaking his leg. But we held on, and here he has been. To say he is liked and will, with Caroline above all, be profoundly missed at Lambeth is an understatement. He is genuinely and universally held in respect and profound affection, as is Caroline, and the experience of working with them has been wonderful and instructive. He seldom shows any sign of being afraid or bad-tempered and manages to sustain a sense of humour in circumstances which most people would consider to be impossible. His work as Bishop to the Forces has also been excellent, and I'm sure you would find the Forces Synod, members of the Forces here, would say the same. He's worked extremely closely with the 3 senior chaplains, been effective in developing vocations as well as in carrying out normal episcopal ministry. Normal episcopal ministry to the Forces, of course, is not normal by most standards. Among memorable moments has been boarding a ship at sea off the Falkland Islands from a smaller boat and driving a Challenger 2 tank on Salisbury Plain. That was one of my happier moments with Nigel, as I was driving another one. Yes, I know you're all thinking boys with the toys, but there we are. And I happened to be upwind of both Nigel and my wife, who was in an armoured vehicle as well, when the Command Sergeant Major suggested that he was able to produce a very thick smoke screen simply by shouting to the driver, "Smoke right." I was tempted and I fell. Nigel disappeared into a thick cloud of particulates, and we remained upwind for the rest of the exercise. Tim, it's a rough life working at Lambeth. The Reverend Cathy Biles at Christ Church Cathedral in the Falkland Islands says she remembers the day in January 2016 that they went out with the military courtesy of Commander British Forces. They were collected in a Sea King helicopter from North Arm in East Falkland and taken to Port Howard in West Falkland. She says that when they clipped the safety line on Nigel and let him kneel to look out of the open side of the helicopter, all they could see was a purple shirt, a flying helmet, and an ear-to-ear grin. He and Caroline then transferred to a Royal Navy inflatable, and escorted by dolphins, they went to HMS Clyde to sail back to Stanley. It's really not a normal job. More seriously, she comments, as Bishop to the Falkland Islands, he has been brilliant. 3 trips there, I think it is, isn't it, Nigel? 3? Not only encouraging and helpful, but ready to cope with and enjoy anything we throw at him. And Caroline, too, has been wonderful. Another former member of staff at Lambeth comments, he's a machine nut, getting into the seat of big vehicles like tanks whenever he can, but he couldn't cope with the coffee machine at Lambeth. The Chaplain-in-Chief of the Royal Air Force, Jonathan Chaffee, who's sitting just back there, reminded me of an experience when we went jointly on the simulator at RAF Bryce Norton on a visit to the RAF. Nigel crashed a jet on the simulator. I crashed it a little further on, and my wife then played her part. The instructor was asked which of Caroline Welby, myself, and Nigel might prove the best pilot, and he replied, I couldn't possibly comment, but she shows considerable potential. Nigel and I were duly discomforted. Our colleagues at Church House say that Nigel's gift is to return things to proportion with a humorous remark. He can also use different languages, celebrating the Eucharist one day at Lambeth with the community of St Anselm in Pidgin. The confession began memorably with, "Me sorry, me bugger up." Which was repeated faithfully by the community of St Anselm, for most of whom English was a second or third language, and some of whom had to have it explained to them later. There is much more that could be said, but I shall end with another member of the Church House staff who is a former colleague of Nigel's. He described Nigel quoting Horace as integer vitae scelerisque purus, making the point that he's not the sort of, I won't translate it, mainly because I can't. And I forgot to put the translation down in my notes. Making the point that he is not the sort of person who leaves a trail of scurrilous anecdotes. Nigel is someone profoundly rounded, thoroughly enjoying his family in every way and adored by his grandchildren, who, in his turn, he adores. He and Caroline will be retiring to the Diocese of Bath and Wells to add to the innumerable bishops living in that region. A compliment in some ways to Peter Price and Peter Hancock. Their hospitality will not diminish, their skill of putting people at their ease and leading them faithfully to the presence of Christ, whose invitation they so easily convey with such delight and joy in their own faith, is something that will be missed greatly. Nigel, we are profoundly grateful for your ministry and for all that we have gained from you.
Thank you. Synod, as we are finishing early, it may be helpful if I let you know that dinner, or tea if you prefer, will be served for those who have booked in for it from 6 p.m. tonight in the Roger Kirk restaurant only. So then, that completes the business for this group of sessions, and I call upon the Archbishop of York, John Sentamu, to prorogue us. Thank you.
Synod before prorogation, the Venerable Wollstonecroft is standing down as the Synodical Secretary of the Convocation of York, having served in this capacity from 2007 after a distinguished period of ministry in the Diocese of Manchester. He was Archdeacon of Manchester from 1998 to 2004. He had to go early, so may I invite the prosecutor to receive this and make sure you deliver it. Don't drink it on the way to Manchester. Express our great gratitude and thanks. Will you please stand? In accordance with Standing Order 45, I prorogue this group of sessions. Go forth into the world in peace, be of good courage. Render to no one evil for evil. Support the weak, the afflicted, the poor, the unloved. Rejoicing always in the power of the Holy Spirit. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit come down upon you and be with you now and forevermore. Amen. Amen. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. In the name of